The sterile, white ceiling of the hospital room was the first thing Min-Seo saw when his eyes fluttered open. The cheap, acrylic panels, stained yellow by time and neglect, were a familiar sight. For 3 years this had been his world. The faint, antiseptic smell that clung to the thin blankets, the constant, low hum of the old air conditioning, and the distant, muffled sounds of a busy ward were the only companions he had known since the doctors had delivered the news. The Degenerative Mana Syndrome, a death sentence for any hunter, and a life sentence of paralysis for a normal person like him. His mana core, the very source of a hunter's power, was slowly deteriorating, leaching the life and vitality from his limbs. He was a prisoner in his own body, a ghost in a world that revered power above all else. But today, something was different. A low, resonant hum, like the vibration of a massive tuning fork, seemed to originate from the very core of his being. It wasn't an external sound, but an internal one, a frequency that hummed in his bones and vibrated behind his eyes. He tried to move his fingers, an action that for the past 3 years had required immense, often futile, effort. This time they obeyed instantly, curling and uncurling with a strength he hadn't felt since before the diagnosis. His heart hammered against his ribs. A surge of adrenaline, sharp and electric, flooded his system. He slowly lifted a hand, holding it in front of his face. It was the same pale, thin hand, yet it felt different. He could feel the mana in the air around it, a subtle pressure, a current of invisible energy that he could now perceive. He focused inward, a lifetime of online forums and hunter broadcasts teaching him the basic theory, even if he'd never had the chance to practice it. There it was, a faint, flickering light in the darkness of his core, not the roaring bonfire of an S-rank, nor even the steady campfire of a D. It was a single, fragile ember. He had awakened. After 3 years of withering away, the system, in its infinite cruelty or perhaps its profound mercy, had finally deemed him worthy. A notification window, shimmering with a translucent blue light, materialized in his field of vision. System initialization complete. Host status awakened. Class none. Unique trait detected. Analyzing. Min-Seo held his breath. This was it, the moment that defined a hunter's life. Would he be a close combat brawler, a long-range mage, a supporter? His fingers trembled not from weakness but from anticipation. Unique skill confirmed. Copycat. His brow furrowed. Copycat. He'd never heard of that skill. He mentally focused on the words and another window expanded before him. Copycat active passive. Rank F. Description. The host possesses the unique ability to observe and analyze the skills of other hunters. Upon sufficient analysis, the host may copy the skill for temporary use. The copied skill's rank and effectiveness will be downgraded by 2 tiers. Maximum skill slots. One analysis time varies based on skill complexity and target rank. The silence in the room was deafening. F rank, the lowest of the low. A rank that was often more of a stigma than a classification. A downgrade of 2 tiers. What good was a copy of an S-rank skill if it was going to function at the level of a B rank? And only one slot. He let his arm fall back onto the bed, the newly discovered strength feeling useless. He was still a ghost, just a ghost who could briefly wear the mask of another. He was no hunter. He was a parlor trick. Just then, the door to his room slid open with a soft hiss. A middle-aged man in a pristine white coat walked in, a warm, practiced smile on his face. This was Dr. An, the head physician for the mana-related disease ward. He was a kind man, but his kindness was always tinged with the weariness of someone who delivered bad news for a living. Min-Seo SSI, Dr. An began, his voice gentle. I felt a spike of mana from this room. You're awake. He paused, picking up the chart at the foot of the bed, his eyes scanning the readouts from the monitoring equipment connected to Min-Seo. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. Your mana levels, they're stable. In fact, they're no, that can't be right. Min-Seo watched him, a flicker of defiant hope in his eyes. I awaken. Dr. An looked up from the chart, his expression a mixture of astonishment and professional concern. Awaken. After 3 years with DMS. That's statistically impossible. The mana required to halt the degradation and form a core is, he trailed off, shaking his head. He pulled a small, handheld mana scanner from his pocket and pointed it at Min-Seo. The device word, its small screen flickering to life. Analyzing. Hunter rank F. Dr. An's face fell. The brief flash of hope in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by the familiar look of pity. F rank. he murmured, more to himself than to Min-Seo. He placed the scanner back in his pocket, his shoulders slumping. Min-Seo SSI, I'm so sorry. The awakening, it's come too late. The DMS has already caused too much damage to your neural pathway. Your body simply won't be able to sustain the mana flow of even the simplest enhancement skill. You're awake and you have a core, but he gestured helplessly at the room. Functionally, for a hunter, you're still paralyzed. The words were a hammer blow, shattering the fragile hope Min-Seo had just begun to nurture. But before the despair could fully consume him, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Urgent shouts, the clatter of gurney wheels and the heavy, thudding footsteps of people running. The door slammed open, and two nurses rushed in, their faces pale with panic. Between them, they supported a young woman. Her face was ashen, her lips blue, and her breaths were coming in short, ragged gasps. Her aura was immense, a crushing pressure that made the air in the room feel thick and heavy. A-rank hunter, Dr. On whispered, his medical instincts kicking in. He rushed to her side. What happened? Get her on the bed. One of the nurses, a young man with sweat beading on his forehead, spoke frantically. Guild raid on a S-rank dungeon went wrong. A corrupted mana spike pierced her core. It's flooding her system. She's dying. Dr. On immediately placed his hands on the woman's chest. His own mana, a soft, green light, began to emanate from his palms. He was a B-rank healer, the best in the hospital. The green light intensified, enveloping the woman's torso. He was pouring his energy into her, trying to counteract the corrupting influence. For a moment, it seemed to work. Her gasping eased slightly. But then, the green light flickered and died. Dr. On grunted, his face draining of color as he was thrown back a step. It's no good, he panted, his voice thick with defeat. Her rank is too high. My healing skill, soothing light. It's only B rank. I can't purify A rank corruption. It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. The room fell into a horrified silence. The woman's gasps were growing weaker. The two nurses looked on helpless. Min-Seo watched from his bed, a spectator to yet another tragedy in a world that seemed to be made of them. But then, a strange thing happened. As he stared at the fatting green light of Dr. On's skill, the system notification flickered back to life. Analyzing. Skill detected. Soothing light B rank. Analysis progress 5%, 10%. His eyes widened. It was analyzing the skill. He looked from the notification to the dying woman to the dead healer. He knew nothing about healing. He had no power. He was an F rank with a useless skill. But as the analysis bar crept to 20%, a desperate, reckless idea took root in his mind. He was already dead. He'd been dead for 3 years. What did he have to lose? Dr. On, he said, his voice weak but clear in the silent room. The doctor didn't turn, his head bowed in defeat. Not now, Min-Seo SSI. The analysis bar hit 40%. I can help her. This made the doctor turn, a flicker of disbelief and annoyance on his face. With what? You're an F rank. Your mana capacity is non-existent. You can't even use a basic enhancement skill, let alone 60%, Min-Seo muttered, his eyes fixed on the notification. What? Min-Seo ignored him. He focused everything he had on the woman. Her life was a fatting ember just like his own had been. He understood that feeling. He knew the cold, creeping darkness. He pushed himself up, swinging his legs off the bed for the first time in 3 years. The muscles screamed in protest, but he forced himself to stand, his knuckles white as he gripped the bed frame for support. 80%. He took a shuddering step forward. The nurses stared, open-mouthed. The F-rank, the cripple, was walking. Dr. On was too stunned to move. Min-Seo stumbled to the woman's bedside, his body trembling with the effort. He looked down at her, then at his own trembling hand. He had no skill of his own. He was empty, a perfect vessel. Analysis complete. Soothing light B rank is now available for copy. Warning, host rank is F. Copied skill will be downgraded to D rank. Effectiveness reduced. Proceed. He didn't hesitate. Proceed. A new sensation flooded him. It wasn't like learning a skill. It was more like a memory being forcibly implanted. He suddenly knew how the mana should flow, the specific vibration it needed to create, the intricate pattern it had to weave. It was foreign, clumsy, and incomplete, but it was there. He raised his hands, placing them on the woman's chest, just as he had seen Dr. On do. He pushed his own meager, flickering mana into his palm. A light flickered to life. It wasn't the strong, confident green of the B-rank skill. It was a pale, sickly greenish yellow, weak and sputtering like a dying firefly. It looked pathetic, It felt pathetic, but it was something. Dr. On gasped, "That's my skill, how?" Min-Seo ignored him, his entire being focused on maintaining the fragile light. He poured every ounce of his newly formed mana into her. The corrupting black energy, visible as dark veins spreading from a wound on her side, met the weak green light. For a moment they struggled, a silent war being waged on a cellular level. The blackness pushed back, overwhelming. The green light began to flicker, on the verge of being snuffed out. It wasn't enough. His mana was too shallow, his Copycat skill too weak. He could feel the woman's life slipping away faster now. Despair, cold and familiar, began to creep back into his heart. He was failing, he was still useless. But then he looked at her face. The ashen skin, the blue lips. She wasn't some powerful A-rank hunter she was just a person fighting for her last breath. And he knew that fight, he knew it intimately. A raw, primal emotion surged through. It wasn't hope or courage. It was pure, defiant empathy. He refused to let her go. He refused to let the darkness win again. In that moment of absolute emotional clarity, his internal ember, his F-rank mana core, didn't flare up. It didn't grow. But something else happened. The flow of mana from his hands changed. It became sharper, more focused. The pale green light dimmed further, but the small area it touched began to pulse with a different kind of energy. Not healing, but stabilization. A temporary, desperate measure. Skill mutation detected. Soothing light D-rank is adapting to host parameters. The black veins stopped their advance. They didn't recede, but they halted, frozen in place by the sheer force of his will. It wasn't a cure. It was a stalemate. But for a dying woman, a stalemate was a victory. Her gasping breaths eased into a more regular, albeit shallow, rhythm. The blue began to fade from her lips, replaced by a faint, terrible pallor. Min-Seo held on for as long as he could, until his own mana was completely spent. The light from his hands died, and he stumbled back, collapsing onto the edge of his bed, utterly exhausted, his body drenched in sweat. The room was silent, all eyes on him. Dr. An rushed to the woman's side, scanning her with his device. His jaw dropped. The corruption, it's been halted. It's not gone, but it's contained. She's stable. He looked at Min-Seo, his face a mask of utter shock. How? An F-rank, you can't, that's impossible. Min-Seo couldn't answer. He was too weak, his head spinning. But the system could. Another translucent blue window appeared before his eyes, visible only to him. Skill soothing light has been modified and stored. New skill created. Vital hold unique. Rank F. Description: a desperate skill born from a failed healing attempt, and the host's profound empathy temporarily halts the progression of wounds or corruption, placing the target in a state of suspended decay. Duration is based on host's remaining mana. Does not heal. This skill cannot be copied from the host. He stared at the words. A unique skill. His own skill. It wasn't a copy. It was an adaptation born from his own weakness and his own heart. The commotion in the hallway had drawn a crowd. Other patients, nurses, and even a few low-rank hunters who were receiving treatment all peered into the room, their eyes fixed on the trembling young man on the bed. The whispers started. Did you see that light? That's the DMS patient. He used a healing skill, an F-rank. Did he just save an A-rank? The pity in their eyes was gone, replaced by curiosity, confusion, and for the first time in Lee Min-Seo's life, a sliver of something that looked a lot like respect. He had awakened as an F-rank with useless skill, but in a moment of desperate empathy, he had just proven that even a copycat could create something original, and in a world obsessed with raw power, that was a miracle far more valuable than any S-rank ability. He was no longer just a ghost in this world. He had just made his first faint mark. The whispers in the hallway were like the first drops of rain before a storm, quiet, scattered, but carrying the promise of something much bigger on the horizon. Lee Min-Seo sat on the edge of his bed, his body trembling from mana exhaustion, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The woman he had saved remained unconscious, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that hadn't been possible just minutes ago. Dr. Un hadn't moved from her side, his eyes darting between his medical scanner and the pale young man who had just performed the impossible. Min-Seo SSI, Dr. An finally said, his voice carrying none of the pity from before. Now it was laced with something else entirely, professional curiosity mixed with genuine bewilderment. What you just did? I've been a healer for 20 years. I've seen awakened with mutation skills, with inheritance skills, with skills that shouldn't exist according to conventional mana theory. But I have never, not once, seen an F-rank copy a B-rank skill and then modify it on the fly to save someone 2 entire tiers above them. That's not just impossible. That's. He trailed off, unable to find the words. Min-Seo understood. There were no words for what had just happened. The system had given him a garbage skill, a parlor trick for a world that had no use for parlor tricks. And yet, in a moment of desperate empathy, that garbage skill had transformed into something the textbooks couldn't explain. He looked down at his hands, still trembling, still pale, still the hands of a cripple who had spent 3 years wasting away in a hospital bed. But they felt different now. They felt like they belonged to someone who could actually touch the world and leave a mark. The door to his room slid open again, this time with more force than necessary. A man in his late 30s stormed in, his presence immediately dominating the small space. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore the navy blue uniform of the Korean Hunters Association, the patches on his collar marking him as an A-rank inspector. His eyes swept the room with the cold precision of someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. They landed on the unconscious woman, then on Min-Seo, then back to Dr. An. "Report," the inspector said, his voice clipped and professional. "Now." Dr. An straightened, clearly uncomfortable under the man's gaze. "Inspector Kang, this is unexpected. I was in the building when the corrupted mana spike was detected," Inspector Kang replied, walking to the woman's bedside. He placed 2 fingers on her neck, checking her pulse himself despite the medical scanner's reading. An A-rank hunter going down to corruption in a public hospital triggers automatic association protocol. Now tell me what happened, and tell me why I'm reading her vitals as stable when the initial report said she had minutes to live. Dr. An glanced at Min-Seo as if seeking permission. Min-Seo just stared back, too exhausted to care about the implications of what was happening. Let the inspector think what he wanted. Let the association investigate. He had saved a life. That was enough. "He saved her," Dr. An finally said, pointing at Min-Seo. "Lee Min-Seo. He was a DMS patient until today. He awakened. F-rank. And then he copied my B-rank healing skill, used it on her, and somehow modified it to halt the corruption's progression. I don't know how. The mana theory alone." Inspector Kang held up a hand, silencing the doctor mid-sentence. He turned to face Min-Seo fully, his eyes narrowing as they took in the thin frame, the hospital gown, the trembling hand. For a long moment he simply stared, as if trying to solve a puzzle that refused to make sense. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, similar to Dr. An's mana scanner but sleeker, more advanced. He pointed it at Min-Seo without asking permission. The device whirred, its screen flashing through data too fast for Min-Seo to follow. Then it beeped, displaying a single line of text. Subject: Lee Min-Seo. Rank F. Mana capacity, below average. Unique trait detected. Unregistered skill type, analysis required. Threat assessment, none. Inspector Kang read the assessment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, not exactly. It was the laugh of someone who had just been reminded that the universe still had surprises in store. Threat assessment, none, he repeated, reading from the device. And yet you just did something that no F-rank in recorded history has ever done. You copied a skill 2 tiers above your own and made it work. The association's entire classification system might need to be rewritten because of you, and this little machine thinks you're not a threat. He pocketed the device, shaking his head. Machines, they only see what they're programmed to see. He walked closer to Min-Seo, stopping just a few feet away. Up close, the inspector was even more intimidating, his aura pressing against Min-Seo's senses like a physical weight. This was a man who had killed, who had fought in dungeons that would drive normal people mad, who had stared into the abyss and made it blink first. "What's your skill called?" Inspector Kang asked. "The one you used on her, the modified version." Min-Seo swallowed, his throat dry. "Vital hold. Vital hold," the inspector repeated, testing the words. "And your original skill, the one you awakened with?" "Copycat, F-rank. Lets me copy skills I observe, but they're downgraded by 2 tiers. Only 1 slot at a time." Inspector Kang nodded slowly, processing the information. "A copy skill. Rare but not unheard of. The downgrade makes it almost useless in practical combat. Copying an S-rank skill to use at B rank is still valuable, but at your current rank, you'd never have the mana capacity to activate it. You're a walking contradiction, Min-Seo. You have a skill that requires observing high-rank abilities to be useful, but no way to actually use those abilities effectively. He paused, glancing back at the woman on the bed. And yet you saved her, with a downgraded healing skill that should have failed. Tell me how. Min-Seo wanted to lie. He wanted to say he didn't know, that it was luck, that he just got lucky. But something in Inspector Kang's eyes demanded the truth. So he told him. He explained the moment of desperation, the feeling of connection to the woman's struggle, the way his mana had flowed differently when he stopped trying to heal and started trying to hold. He explained the system notification, the creation of a unique skill, the realization that Copycat wasn't just about imitation, it was about adaptation. When he finished, the room was silent. Even the whispers in the hallway had died down, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Inspector Kang stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He bowed. It was a small bow, barely an inclination of his head, but from an A-rank inspector to an F-rank cripple, it might as well have been a full prostration. "You have my respect," Inspector Kang said, straightening. Not many people would risk their lives for a stranger. Even fewer would do it with a skill that had every right to fail. The Hunters Association doesn't officially recognize F-ranks for field work. You're considered too weak, too unstable, too much of a liability. But I'm not the association. I'm just a man who's seen too many good hunters die because no one was willing to try the impossible. He reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a business card. It was plain white, with only a name and a phone number printed in black ink. "If you want out of this hospital, if you want to actually use that bizarre skill of yours for something meaningful, call me. I work with a small team, off the books, unofficial. We handle the things the association won't touch. You'd be a liability. You'd probably die in your first real mission. But you'd die standing up, and that's more than most people ever get." Min-Seo took the card, his fingers trembling. The paper felt heavy in his hand, heavier than it had any right to be. This was a choice, a real choice. Stay in the hospital where he was safe but useless, or step into a world that would crush him without a second thought, but at least give him the chance to matter. Before he could answer, a soft groan came from the bed. The woman was waking up. Her eyes fluttered open, dark brown, confused, searching. They found Min-Seo immediately, as if some invisible thread connected them. She tried to sit up, but Dr. An gently pushed her back down. "Easy," he said. "You've been through something traumatic. Your body needs rest." The woman ignored him, her gaze locked on Min-Seo. "You," she whispered, her voice rough from nearly dying. "I felt you, in the darkness. Someone was there, someone held on." She reached out a hand, weak and trembling, and Min-Seo instinctively took it. Her skin was cold, but her grip, even weakened, was surprisingly strong. "What's your name?" Min-Seo. Min-Seo, she repeated, as if memorizing the sound. "I'm Yu Jinna, S-rank hunter, leader of the Eclipse Guild." She said it not with pride, but as simple fact. "I've been in dungeons that would break kings. I've fought creatures that don't have names in any language, but I've never been as close to death as I was today. And I've never had anyone pull me back." Her eyes glistened with something that might have been tears, though she blinked them away before they could fall. "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me what I'm fighting for. Thank you." Min-Seo didn't know what to say. An S-rank hunter was thanking. An S-rank hunter was looking at him like he was something precious, something worth protecting. The weight of it was almost too much to bear. Inspector Kang cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Jinna SSI, you need to rest. The corruption has been halted, but it hasn't been removed. You're still in danger." Jinna's eyes hardened. "I know." She released Min-Seo's hand, but her gaze remained on him. "Min-Seo SSI, I owe you a debt. An S-rank's debt is not a small thing. When you're ready to leave this hospital, come to the Eclipse Guild. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Whatever you need, training, resources, protection, it's yours." Dr. An's jaw dropped. An S-rank guild leader offering patronage to an F-rank. It was unheard of. It was the kind of thing that made headlines, that shifted the balance of power in the hunter community. And it was happening in a dingy hospital room, witnessed only by a stunned doctor, two wide-eyed nurses, and an A-rank inspector who suddenly looked very interested in this conversation. Min-Seo looked down at the business card in his hand, then back at Jinna. "Two offers. Two paths. Inspector Kang's off-the-book team, where he would be a liability but could make a difference in the shadows. Or Yu Jinna's Eclipse Guild, where he would be protected, trained, and elevated beyond anything he could have imagined. But as he stood there, caught between two impossible choices, a notification flickered to life in his vision. New skill analysis available. Target Yu Jinna S rank. Detected skill. Eclipse Blade S rank. A sword technique that channels mana into cutting attacks capable of severing space itself. Analysis progress, 0.01%. Estimated completion, 347 days, 6 hours, 23 minutes. His breath caught. The system was analyzing an S-rank skill. It would take nearly a year, but it was possible. He could copy Eclipse Blade. He could use an S-rank skill, even downgraded to a rank, even with his pitiful mana capacity. It was a distant possibility, a star on the horizon, but it was real. And in that moment, Min-Seo understood something profound. His skill wasn't garbage. It wasn't a parlor trick. It was potential, pure, unrefined, desperate potential. Copycat didn't just copy, it learned. It adapted. It grew. And if he could learn from an S-rank, if he could adapt her techniques to his own limitations, then maybe, just maybe, he could become something more than an F-rank useless skill. He looked at Inspector Kang, then at Yu Jinna. Two paths, two futures, but the choice wasn't really about them. It was about him, about what he wanted to become. "I need time," he finally said, his voice steadier than he felt. "To think, to recover, to understand what I am now." Inspector Kang nodded, accepting the answer. "The offer stands. Whenever you're ready." Jinna squeezed his hand one last time. "The Eclipse Guild will be waiting. Don't take too long, Min-Seo. The world doesn't wait for anyone." As if on cue, the hospital's emergency alarms began to blare. Red lights flashed in the hallway. Distant screams echoed from somewhere deep in the building. Inspector Kang's hand went to the weapon at his hip, his body immediately shifting to combat readiness. Jinna tried to sit up, her face pale with effort, but Dr. An held her down. "What's happening?" Min-Seo asked, his heart racing. Inspector Kang's device beeped frantically. He glanced at it and his face went pale. "Corrupted mana spike. Multiple sources. Something's wrong, something's very wrong." He looked at Min-Seo, his eyes hard. "Stay here, protect her. If anything gets through, you're all that stands between her and death. Can you do that?" Min-Seo looked at his trembling hand, at the fatting notification of Eclipse Blade's analysis, at Yu Jinna, an S-rank hunter reduced to helplessness by the very corruption that should have killed her, at the screaming and the red lights and the chaos spreading through the hospital. He thought about running, about hiding, about letting someone else handle it. But then he remembered the feeling of holding onto Jinna's life, of refusing to let go, of creating something new from the ashes of his own despair. He wasn't strong. He wasn't brave. He was just a man who had spent 3 years dying and who had finally found a reason to live. "I'll do it," he said. Inspector Kang almost smiled. Then he was gone, racing toward the screams. Min-Seo turned to Jinna. Her eyes were on him, watching, waiting. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know if he could protect her. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to let her die. Not today, not ever. The copycat had found something worth copying. Now, he just had to survive long enough to use it. The corridor outside Min-Seo's room had transformed into a war zone. The sterile white lights flickered violently, casting strobing shadows across walls now splattered with something that looked black under the erratic illumination. The source of the screaming became horribly clear as Min-Seo stepped through the doorway. Patients who had been mobile enough to flee were being cut down by things that moved wrong, that jerked and spasmed like puppets with tangled string. They had been hunters once. Min-Seo could see it in the tattered remnants of guild uniforms, in the weapons still clutched in trembling hands. But their eyes were wrong, completely black, with veins of corrupted purple spreading from their pupils like cracks in porcelain. The corrupted mana spike Inspector Kang had detected wasn't just an environmental hazard. It had infected the hunters in the hospital, turning them into something that existed between life and death, between human and monster. 3 of them stood between Min-Seo and the door to Jinna's room. One was a man in his 40s, built like a tank, his fists crackling with orange flame mana, clearly a fire-type enhancer before the corruption took him. Another was a woman, younger, her body flickering with the telltale signs of a speed type, her movements leaving afterimages in the air. The third was the most dangerous. A teenager, no older than 16, his hands wreathed in dark energy that made Min-Seo's skin crawl just looking at. A corruption-type hunter, the same classification as whatever had caused this outbreak. They hadn't noticed him yet. Their attention was fixed on a cluster of nurses and patients huddled in a maintenance closet at the end of the hall, the door trembling as one of the corrupted slammed against it with inhuman strength. Min-Seo's mind raced through options. Run. They'd catch him before he made it 3 steps. Fight. He had no combat skills, no training, no experience. His body was still recovering from 3 years of paralysis. The only thing he had was Copycat, and the only skill currently in his single slot was Vital Hold, a healing skill, useless in a fight. But as he watched the corrupted hunters, something strange happened. The system flickered to life. Multiple combat skills detected in vicinity. Analyzing. Flame Fist C rank. Analysis progress 2%. Blink Step C rank. Analysis progress 1%. Corruption Touch B rank. Analysis progress 0.5%. The percentages were moving faster than before, much faster. When he'd analyzed Dr. On's skill, it had crawled at a snail's pace. Now, despite the chaos, the analysis bars were filling at 10 times that speed. Why? What was different? Then he understood. Dr. On's skill had been used calmly, precisely, with controlled intent. These corrupted hunters weren't controlling their skills, the skills were controlling them. Their mana was leaking, bleeding out in uncontrolled waves, making their abilities as visible as a lighthouse in the dark. The system wasn't struggling to parse controlled energy. It was feasting on raw, unfiltered power. Flame Fist C rank. Analysis complete. Blink Step C rank. Analysis complete. 2 skills fully analyzed in second. Min-Seo's heart hammered. He had 2 slots now. No, he checked his status and saw the truth. The skills weren't stored. They were queued, waiting for him to choose. His single slot meant he could only hold one at a time, but the analysis itself was permanent. Once a skill was analyzed, it remained in his mental library, available for copying whenever he had an open slot. The implications were staggering. He could build a collection. He could learn hundreds, thousands of skills, swapping them in and out as needed. The only limit was his single active slot and his pathetic mana capacity. But right now, he needed to make a choice. The corrupted hunters were about to break through that closet door. The people inside had second. Flame Fist or Blink Step, raw power or mobility. He thought about Jinna's words, about holding on, about refusing to let go. Blink Step would let him avoid attacks, maybe grab the nurses and run. But run where? The hospital was overrun. There was no safe place. Flame Fist would let him fight, but fighting meant getting close, meant using a C-rank skill downgraded to E-rank by his F-rank core. An E-rank flame attack against corrupted hunters who still retained their original power level. It was suicide. Unless he looked at the third corrupted hunter, the teenager with corruption touch. B-rank, downgraded to D-rank if copied, still useless against the other 2. But maybe not useless against the source of the outbreak. Select skill to copy. Corruption Touch B-rank right arrow D-rank. The system confirmed his choice, and suddenly Min-Seo understood darkness. Not the absence of light, but the presence of something older, hungrier. The corrupted teenager's skill flooded into his consciousness. Not the full version, but enough. He knew how to channel corrupted mana now. He knew how it felt to let the darkness in. And he knew, with terrible certainty, that the only way to stop corrupted hunters was to meet their corruption with something worse. He stepped into the hallway. The corrupted hunters turned as one, their black eyes fixing on his predatory focus. The flame user's fists ignited. The speed user flickered, testing her reign. The corruption user simply smiled, a horrible, knowing smile that didn't reach his empty eyes. Min-Seo, no. Jinna's voice screamed from behind him, but he couldn't turn back now. He was committed. The speed user moved first, blinking across the distance in a fraction of a second, her hand reaching for his throat. Min-Seo didn't try to dodge. He couldn't. Instead, he activated Corruption Touch at the exact moment her fingers brushed his skin. The effect was immediate, and nothing like he expected. Instead of corrupting him, the skill seemed to recognize something in the speed user's corrupted mana. It didn't attack. It resonated. For a single, frozen moment, Min-Seo could feel what she felt, The hunger, the confusion, the tiny spark of her original self trapped beneath the corruption, screaming to be free. He reached for that spark and pulled. The speed user screamed, a real scream, human and terrified, as the purple veins in her eyes receded. She stumbled backward, her hands flying to her face, her body shuddering as the corruption fought to reassert control. For 3 seconds, she was herself again. 3 seconds of clarity in a nightmare. Then the darkness rushed back in, and she turned on him with renewed fury. But 3 seconds was enough. Min-Seo understood now. Corruption touch wasn't just an offensive skill. At its core, it was a connection skill, a way to link with corrupted mana, to understand it, to manipulate it. The corrupted hunters weren't using it because they'd lost the cognitive function to do anything but attack. But Min-Seo still had his mind, still had his will. He could use their own corruption against them. The flame user was next, charging with a burning fist aimed at Min-Seo's chest. Min-Seo dropped to the ground, a clumsy dodge that would never have worked against a trained hunter. But the flame user's movements were jerky, uncoordinated, the fine motor control sacrificed for raw power. The flaming fist passed over Min-Seo's head, and he slapped his palm against the man's leg, activating corruption touch again. This time he didn't just pull, he pushed. He forced his own emotions into the connection. The 3 years of despair, the loneliness, the moment of hope when he'd awakened, the desperate empathy that had saved Jinnah. He flooded the corrupted hunter with everything that made him human, hoping some of it would stick. The flame user froze mid-swing, his black eyes widening. The fire around his fist sputtered and died. He looked down at Min-Seo, really looked, not with predator's hunger but with dawning horror. "My wife," he choked out, his voice rusty from disuse. "I was going home to my wife." Then the corruption surged back and he raised his fist again. But this time, Min-Seo was ready. He didn't try to fight. He rolled away, putting distance between them, and assessed the situation. 2 corrupted hunters temporarily disrupted, one still fully under control. The closet door was splintering. The nurses inside were sobbing. And somewhere deeper in the hospital, Min-Seo could feel the source of the corruption pulsing like a second heartbeat. A presence so dark it made the corrupted hunters feel like candles next to a bonfire. The teenage corruption user hadn't moved. He was watching Min-Seo with an expression that was almost curious, tilting his head like a dog trying to understand a new command. Of the 3, he was the most dangerous, not because of his skill, but because he was the only one showing any sign of actual intelligence. "You're different," the teenager said. His voice was wrong, layered, as if 2 people were speaking at once. "You taste like us, but you're not us. What are you?" Min-Seo didn't answer. He was too busy thinking. The system had analyzed corruption touch, but it had also analyzed flame fist and blink step. They were still in his queue, waiting. If he could switch skills mid-combat, if he could combine them somehow. Warning: rapid skill switching places extreme strain on host's mana core. Prolonged use may result in permanent damage. Permanent damage. Like 3 years of DMS wasn't permanent damage. Like dying in this hallway wasn't permanent. Min-Seo switched skills. Blink step flooded into his consciousness, and suddenly the world moved slower. He understood how to bend space, how to fold distance, how to exist in 2 places at once. His body screamed in protest. His F-rank core wasn't designed for that, but he ignored the pain and activated the skill. He vanished from his position and reappeared directly behind the flame user, his palm already pressing against the back of the man's neck. Corruption touch activated again, and this time Min-Seo didn't just push emotion, he pushed a command. "Sleep." The flame user's eyes rolled back and he collapsed, unconscious but alive. The corruption was still there, still writhing beneath his skin, but his body had shut down. Min-Seo had forced a human response from a corrupted vessel. The speed user screamed in fury and blurred toward him. Min-Seo activated blink step again and felt something tear in his core. White-hot pain lanced through his chest, but he was already moving, appearing behind her, his hand outstretched. She was ready this time. She spun mid-attack, her fist catching him in the ribs. Min-Seo heard something crack, felt the breath explode from his lungs, and then he was flying backward, slamming into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. He slid to the ground, gasping, blood filling his mouth. The speed user advanced, her movements slower now. She'd used up energy too, her corrupted body burning through its reserves. but she was still standing, still coming. Min-Seo couldn't move. His ribs were broken, his core was screaming, and he had seconds before she reached him. Flame Fist C rank is available for copying. Warning, host is critically injured. Activating additional skills may result in core collapse and death. Core collapse, death. The words were abstract, distant, like they belonged to someone else's story. Min-Seo looked past the advancing speed user to the closet door. It had finally given way. The corrupted flame user's body had fallen against it, blocking the exit, and the nurses and patients inside were trapped, staring out at the nightmare with wide, hopeless eyes. One of them was a little girl, maybe 7 years old. She was clutching a stuffed rabbit, and she was looking directly at Min-Seo. He thought about his 3 years in the hospital, about the days when he'd wanted to die, when the paralysis had felt like a fate worse than death, about the nurses who had changed his sheets and fed him and talked to him like he was still a person when everyone else had given up. They hadn't let him die. He wasn't going to let them die either. Copy skill, Flame Fist C rank right arrow E rank. The knowledge of fire flooded his damaged consciousness. It felt nothing like corruption touches cold hunger or blink steps spatial awareness. This was pure, burning destruction, the desire to reduce everything to ash. Min-Seo embraced it, let it fill the broken spaces in his core, and raised his hand just as the speed user reached him. The flame that erupted from his palm was pathetic by hunter standards, a sputtering orange burst that would barely singe a normal person. But against a corrupted hunter whose body was already breaking down, already burning through its own life force to fuel its attacks, it was enough. The speed user's clothing caught fire. She shrieked and stumbled backward, beating at the flames with hands that were already blackening. The corruption in her veins seemed to feed the fire, turning orange flames purple, and for a horrible moment Min-Seo watched her burn. Then he switched to corruption touch one last time, reaching through the flames to grab her arm. He didn't try to save her. He couldn't, but he could give her the same gift he'd given the flame user, a moment of peace before the end. Her eyes cleared as the fire consumed her. She looked at Min-Seo, and in that final second she smiled. Not the corrupted smile of a puppet, but a real smile, grateful, relieved. "Thank you," she whispered. Then the fire took her and she was gone. Min-Seo fell back against the wall, his body shaking uncontrollably. His vision was blurring at the edges. He'd used 3 skills in under 2 minutes. Blink Step twice, Corruption Touch 3 times, Flame Fist once. His core felt like a shattered glass, held together by willpower alone. But the hallway was quiet. The flame user was unconscious. The speed user was ash. And the teenage corruption user was applauding. Slowly, deliberately, the boy clapped his hands together. Once, twice, 3 times. His black eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement. "Beautiful," he said. "Absolutely beautiful. I've never seen anyone fight their own limitations like that. Most people break long before they reach their edge. You reached yours, smashed through it, and kept going." He tilted his head, that dog-like curiosity back in full force. "What would you be capable of with real power, with a core that didn't hold you back?" Min-Seo tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. "Who? What are you?" The boy smiled, a child's smile, innocent and wrong. "I'm what happens when corruption finds a willing host, when someone says yes to the darkness instead of fighting it." He spread his arms, and Min-Seo felt the pressure in the air intensify. This boy wasn't just infected. He was the source, or at least a piece of it. The thing that's waking up beneath this hospital, it's been sleeping for 1,000 years. Today it decided to dream, and its dream. He gestured at the chaos around them. "Well, you see what it dreams about." Min-Seo's blood ran cold. Beneath the hospital, 1,000 years. There were old stories about this land, about the dungeons that had spawned before the modern era, about things that had been sealed away because they were too dangerous to kill. If one of those things was waking up, the association will contain it, he said, hoping it was true. The boy laughed, actually laughed. "The association is already dead. Didn't you feel it? When the spike hit, it hit everywhere. Every hunter in a 5-kilometer radius got a taste of the dream. Most of them are like my friends here." He gestured at the unconscious flame user, at the pile of ash that had been the speed user. "A few are like me, and one," his eyes went distant, almost reverent, "one is becoming something new, something beautiful." He started walking toward Min-Seo, each step deliberate, unhurried. "You interest me, Copycat. You shouldn't exist. F-ranks don't do what you just did. F-ranks don't copy B-rank skills and survive. F-ranks don't keep fighting when their core is screaming for mercy. He crouched down, bringing his face level with Min-Seo. I think the dream wants you. I think it saw something in you that it likes. And when it wakes up fully, it's going to come find you. It's going to offer you the same choice it offered me. He reached out and touched Min-Seo's forehead with one finger. The contact was ice cold, and Min-Seo felt something slither into his mind. A whisper, a promise, a temptation. You could be so much more than this broken body. You could have all the skills in the world. No limits, no degradation, just power pure and endless. Say yes. For a single, terrible moment, Min-Seo wanted to. The offer was everything he'd ever dreamed of: power, freedom, the ability to protect everyone, to never be helpless again. 3 years of paralysis, of watching the world move on without him, of being useless and forgotten. This was the escape from all of it. But then he thought about Jinnah, about the moment he'd held onto her life and refused to let go, about the nurses in the closet, the little girl with the stuffed rabbit, the flame user's mention of his wife, about the speed user's final smile. Power wasn't freedom. Power was responsibility. And if he took this offer, if he said yes to the darkness, he'd be betraying everyone he'd just fought to save. No, he said. The boy's eyes widened in genuine surprise. No, but you're broken, you're dying. Your core is collapsing right now, can't you feel it? In minutes, you'll be dead. And you're saying no to eternal life. I'm saying no to becoming a monster, Min-Seo gritted out. I'd rather die human than live as that. For a long moment, the boy just stared at him. Then slowly he smiled. It wasn't the corrupted smile or the curious smile. This one was almost respectful. I understand now, the boy said. The dream doesn't want to corrupt you. It wants to learn from you, because people like you, people who would rather die than give up, they're the rarest kind of all. He stood, brushing off his knees. I hope you survive, Copycat. I hope you find a way to fix that broken core of yours. Because when you do, when you finally have the power to match your will, I want to fight you, for real, at full strength. It'll be the most interesting thing I've done in 1,000 years. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the chaos of the hospital as if he'd never existed. The pressure in the air faded and Min-Seo was left alone in the hallway, bleeding, broken, and barely conscious. Through the haze of pain, he heard footsteps. Inspector Kang, his uniform torn and bloodied, his weapon drawn, skidding to a halt beside him. Min-Seo, Min-Seo, stay with me. Strong hands pressed against his wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. What happened? Where are the corrupted? Min-Seo tried to speak, but only blood came out. His vision was narrowing, the world compressing to a single point of light. He could hear Jinnah's voice somewhere in the distance, calling his name, could feel hands on his chest, could smell smoke and blood and something else. Something ancient and hungry, seeping up from the earth beneath the hospital. But before the darkness claimed him completely, he saw one last notification. Critical damage detected. Host core, 3% integrity and falling. Emergency protocol activated. Searching for compatible skills to stabilize host. Skill found, vital hold unique. Applying vital hold to host. The last thing he felt was the familiar sensation of holding on, of refusing to let go. Except this time, the skill wasn't being used on someone else. It was being used on him. And in the darkness, as his body failed and his mind flickered toward oblivion, Lee Min-Seo made a promise to himself. He would survive. He would find a way to fix his core. He would learn every skill, copy every power, master every technique. And when he faced that boy again, that ancient, corrupted thing wearing a child's face, he would be ready. The copycat wasn't done yet. He was just getting started. The darkness was not empty. It was filled with whisper. Min-Seo floated in an endless void, his body weightless, his mind strangely clear despite the knowledge that he should be dead. The whispers surrounded him on all sides, fragments of conversations, half-formed thoughts, echoes of skills he'd analyzed but never used. Flame Fist whispered of destruction. Blink Step murmured about the spaces between spaces. Corruption Touch spoke in tongues, its voice layered and ancient, promising things that made his soul shudder. But beneath them all, softer but more persistent, was Vital Hold, his skill, his creation, and it was screaming. Hold on, hold on, hold on, don't let go, don't you dare, let go, we're not done. Yet, we're not finished, hold on, hold on, hold on. The screaming became a rhythm. The rhythm became a heartbeat, And the heartbeat became the first thing Min-Seo felt when consciousness dragged him back to the surface. He opened his eyes to a ceiling he didn't recognize. White, but not the stained yellow of his hospital room. Clean, sterile, expensive. The air smelled different too. No antiseptic, no cheap disinfectant. Just the faint scent of ozone and something else. Something that tickled the back of his throat like static electricity. Mana, thick, concentrated mana, circulating through the room like blood through living tissue. "You're awake." The voice came from his left. Min-Seo turned his head, slowly, painfully, his neck muscles protesting, and found Yu-Jin-Ah sitting in a chair beside his bed. She looked different than she had in the hospital, stronger. The ashen pallor was gone, replaced by healthy color. Her eyes, which had been dull with approaching death, now gleamed with their full S-rank intensity. But she was watching him with an expression that didn't match her recovered strength. It was soft, vulnerable, almost afraid. "How long?" Min-Seo asked. His voice came out as a croak, his throat dry and raw. 3 weeks, Jin-Ah said. "You've been unconscious for 3 weeks. They didn't think you'd wake up. The doctors, the healers, the association's best medical team, they all said your core was too damaged, that your body had burned through its reserves and there was nothing left to save." She paused and something flickered in her eyes. "They didn't account for your skill, that vital hold. It wasn't just holding you together. It was learning, adapting, growing." Min-Seo closed his eyes, reaching inward. His core was there, faint, fragile but present, and wrapped around it like a second skin was something new, something that pulsed with the same rhythm as the vital hold screaming in his memory. Host status update. Core integrity, 12% and stabilizing. Unique skill evolution detected. Vital hold F-rank has evolved into persistent heart E. Description. A skill born from absolute refusal to die. Automatically maintains host's vital functions as long as even 1% of core integrity remain. Slowly regenerates core integrity over time. Cannot be deactivated. Cannot be copied. Persistent heart. Min-Seo almost laughed. His body was so determined to survive that it had turned his desperation into a permanent feature. He was literally too stubborn to die. "What happened?" he asked, opening his eyes. "After I passed out, the hospital, the corruption." Jin-Ah's expression hardened. The association quarantined the entire facility. 537 people were inside when the spike hit. Hunters, patients, staff, visitors. She delivered the numbers like wounds, each one precise and painful. 211 survived. 183 of those were fully cured. The rest, she trailed off, her jaw tightening. "The rest are like the ones I fought," Min-Seo finished. "Still corrupted, still dangerous. Contained, not cured," Jin-Ah confirmed. "The association has them in special facilities. They're studying them, trying to find a way to reverse the corruption. So far, nothing's worked." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into his. "But you did something different. The reports from the survivors in that maintenance closet, they said you fought 3 corrupted hunters and one, not just killed them. You made one fall asleep. You gave another a moment of peace before she died. You understood them in a way no one else could." Min-Seo remembered the boy, the ancient thing wearing a child's face. It wasn't just corruption, it was something else, something old. "It spoke to me, offered me power." Jin-Ah went very still. "What did it say?" He told her everything. The boy's words, the offer, the presence beneath the hospital, the 1,000-year sleep. When he finished, Jin-Ah's face was pale beneath her recovered color. "The sealed ones," she whispered. "Kings, I hoped it wasn't true. You know what it is. I know the stories. Every S-rank does." She stood, packing the length of the room. "Before the modern dungeon era, before the system as we know it, there were things that ruled this world. Not monsters, not beasts, intelligent. Consciousnesses so vast and alien that they shaped reality just by existing. The first hunters, the ones who awakened before the system stabilized, they fought them, sealed them, buried them in places where they couldn't reach the surface." She stopped, turning to face him. "Your hospital was built on top of one of those seals. Probably didn't mean anything at the time. The seals were supposed to last forever. But forever's a long time, and things weaken. The spike, the corruption, it was leaking through. Dreaming," the boy said. "That's the worst part." Jin-Ah's voice was grim. "If it's dreaming, it's not fully awake. If it's not fully awake, we have time. But if it offered you power, if it noticed you specifically." She shook her head. "That changes things. Sealed ones don't notice individual. They think on scales we can't comprehend. For one of them to focus on a single person means you matter to it, means you're part of its dream now, whether you want to be or not. Min-Seo thought about the whispers in the darkness, about the way the system had analyzed corrupted skills faster than normal ones, about the strange resonance he'd felt when using corruption touch, as if the darkness recognized him, welcomed him, wanted him. "I didn't accept its offer," he said. "It doesn't matter, you were touched, marked. From now on, that thing is going to be aware of you, and when it finally wakes—" Jinnah didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The door to the room slid open, and Inspector Kang walked in. He looked different too, tired, worn, with new lines etched into his face that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. But his eyes were the same, sharp, assessing, never missing a detail. "You're awake," he said, stating the obvious. "Good, we need to talk." "About what?" Min-Seo asked. Kang pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "About what happens next. The association has classified the entire incident. Official story is a dungeon break from a hidden gate. The truth, about the sealed one, about the corrupted hunters who retained intelligence, about the F-rank who fought 3 infected and survived. That's all buried so deep it'll never see light." He fixed Min-Seo with a hard stare. "But buried doesn't mean forgotten. There are people in the association who know about you now. People who are very interested in how an F-rank did what you did." "Interested how?" "Interested in studying, in taking you apart piece by piece to figure out how your skill works, in using you as bait to draw out that sealed one before it's ready to wake." Kang's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Officially, you're a hero. Unofficially, you're a resource. And resources get used." Jinnah stepped forward, her aura flaring. "No one's using him for anything. He's under Eclipse Guild protection. I made that clear." "You made it clear to the mid-level bureaucrats," Kang agreed. "The people at the top, they don't care about guild politics. They care about results. And if they decide Min-Seo is the key to stopping a sealed one, they'll take him. Your guild can't fight the entire association. Then we fight anyway. Then you die, and Min-Seo dies with you." Kang's voice softened slightly. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer an alternative." Min-Seo looked between them. "What alternative?" Kang reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, thin, unmarked, ordinary. He handed it to Min-Seo. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list of names. All of them had 2 things in common. They were F-rank, and they had died in the hospital incident. "These people," Kang said quietly, "they were all like you, F-ranks with unique skills that shouldn't exist. They died because the association's emergency protocols prioritize higher ranks. When the spike hit, the healers went to the A ranks first, the B ranks second. By the time anyone got to the F ranks, it was too late." He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "I pulled their files. Every single one of them had a skill that could have made a difference if anyone had bothered to look. But no one did, because F-ranks are invisible, expendable, forgotten." Min-Seo stared at the names. Strangers, dead because the system, both the literal system and the social one, had decided they didn't matter. "You said you work with a small team," he remembered. "Off the books, unofficial." "I do," Kang leaned forward. "My team finds F-ranks with potential. We train them, we equip them, and we send them into situations the association won't touch because they're too politically sensitive or too dangerous for official sanction. We've been doing it for 7 years. In that time, we've saved more lives than most A-rank guilds, and we've lost people too. Good people. But every single one of them died knowing they mattered, knowing they made a choice." Min-Seo looked at Jinnah. Her expression was conflicted. She clearly wanted to protect him, but she also understood what Kang was offering. Purpose, agency, the chance to be more than a resource. "If I join you," Min-Seo said slowly, "what happens to the sealed one, to the boy?" Kang's eyes hardened. "We find them, we stop them. Not because the association tells us to, but because they're a threat to everyone, high rank and low rank alike. My team doesn't play politics. We do what needs to be done. And my core, my limitations, you learn to work around them. You get stronger. You find skills that complement your weaknesses." Kang's gaze was intense. "You're not a normal F-rank, Min-Seo. Normal F-ranks can't copy B-rank skills. Normal F-ranks can't evolve their abilities mid-combat. You have potential, real potential. But potential means nothing if you're locked away in a guild headquarters or dissected in an association lab." The room fell silent. Min-Seo could feel both of them watching him, waiting for his decision. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a cripple in a hospital bed, invisible and forgotten. Now he was caught between an S-rank guild leader who wanted to protect him and an A-rank inspector who wanted to give him a purpose. But it wasn't really about them. It was about the boy, the ancient thing wearing a child's face, walking through the world with 1,000 years of hatred and hunger. It was about the corrupted hunters who had been people once, with families and dreams and futures. It was about the F-ranks on this list, dead because no one had thought they mattered. He thought about his skill, Copycat. Everyone saw it as weak, as useless as a parlor trick, but they were wrong. It wasn't about copying. It was about understanding, about seeing the essence of a skill and making it his own, about taking the power of others and transforming it into something new. The boy had offered him eternal life. Kang was offering him a purpose. Jinnah was offering him safety. None of them were offering him what he really wanted. He wanted to prove that F-ranks mattered. He wanted to show the world that the weakest among them could still make a difference. He wanted to look that ancient thing in its corrupted eyes and say, without fear, without hesitation, I am not your toy. I am not your dream. I am Min-Seo, and I will never stop holding on. I'll join your team, he said to Kang, but on one condition. Kang raised an eyebrow. Name it. Train me, push me. Don't treat me like glass just because my core is weak. If I'm going to matter, I need to get stronger, strong enough to face that boy, strong enough to make sure no one else ends up on a list like this. He held up the folder. And when the time comes, when that sealed one wakes up for real, I want to be there. I want to look it in the face and show it what an F-rank can do. For a long moment, Kang just stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his weathered face, the first genuine smile Min-Seo had seen from him. I was hoping you'd say that, Kang said. Welcome to the team, Copycat. You're going to fit right in. Jinnah stepped forward, placing a hand on Min-Seo's shoulder. Eclipse Guild will still support you. Training facilities, resources, connections, whatever you need. You saved my life. That debt doesn't disappear just because you choose a different path. Min-Seo nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. Two allies, two powerful people who believed in him. It was more than he'd had in 3 years. But even as warmth spread through him, he couldn't shake the cold awareness of what lurked beneath. The sealed one was still there, still dreaming, still reaching out with tendrils of corruption. The boy was still walking, still watching, still waiting for the day they would meet again. And somewhere in the darkness of his own core, persistent heart kept beating, a rhythm of survival, of refusal, of hope. The Copycat had a long way to go, but for the first time in his life, he was excited to see where the road would lead. The training facility Kang's team operated out of was nothing like what Min-Seo had expected. Hidden beneath an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district of Seoul, it was a sprawling complex of reinforced concrete, advanced mana-dampening technology, and simulation rooms that could replicate everything from dungeon environments to urban combat zones. The moment Min-Seo stepped through the hidden entrance, he felt the weight of it, not just the physical structure, but the history embedded in every scarred wall and training mat. This is where we make the invisible visible, Kang said, leading him through a narrow corridor. Every person you'll meet here was written off by the system. F-ranks with cores so weak the association wouldn't even register them. E-ranks with skills that seemed useless until someone figured out how to use them right. D-ranks who were too old, too injured, too broken for the guilds to bother with. He paused at a heavy steel door, his hand resting on the access panel. In here, they're not liability, they're assets, and you're about to meet the best of them. The door slid open, revealing a cavernous training hall. At its center, two figures were locked in combat, a man and a woman, both moving with a speed and precision that made Min-Seo's eyes struggle to follow. The man was huge, easily over 6.5 feet, with muscles that looked carved from granite. His fists crackled with electricity, each punch leaving trails of ozone in the air. The woman was his opposite, small, wiry, almost delicate in appearance, but she moved like water, flowing around his attacks with effortless grace, her hands leaving trails of frost wherever they touched. Marcus Chen, Kang said, nodding toward the giant, former D-rank brawler. His core was damaged in a dungeon collapse 5 years ago, dropped him to F-rank. Guilds dumped him, now he's our heavy hitter. He gestured at the woman. Yun Hai-suk, E-rank. Her skill, Frost Dance, lets her lower the temperature of anything she touches. Useless in a straight fight, they said. Tell that to the B-rank assassin she froze solid last month. The fight ended as Min-Seo watched, Haesuk slipping inside Marcus's guard, her palm pressing against his chest. Ice spread across his torso in an instant, locking his arms in place. Marcus laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the walls and flexed. The ice shattered. He swept Haesuk off her feet, deposited her gently on the ground. "You're getting slow, old man," Haesuk said, grinning up at him. "You're getting predictable, Ice Queen," Marcus retorted. "You always go for the chest. Next time I'll leave an opening and you'll find yourself hugging a lightning bolt." They both turned as Kang approached, their eyes immediately finding Min-Seo. He felt the weight of their assessment, the way hunters always evaluated each other, looking for weaknesses, calculating threat levels. He wondered what they saw. A thin young man in hospital clothes, pale and trembling, with a core so fragile it barely registered on their senses. "This is the one?" Marcus asked, his voice skeptical but not unkind. "The F rank who saved an S rank." "The same," Kang confirmed. "Lee Min-Seo. Skill, Copycat. Unique variant that lets him analyze and temporarily copy any skill he observes. Also developed a survival skill that literally refused to let him die when his core should have collapsed." Haesuk's eyebrows rose. "A survival skill, those are rare, like S-rank rare. His entire existence is rare." Kang turned to Min-Seo. "These two will be your primary trainers. Marcus for physical conditioning and combat awareness. Haesuk for skill optimization and tactical thinking. You'll live here, train here, and when you're ready, you'll mission here. Any question?" Min-Seo had 1,000 questions, but the only one that mattered was, "When do we start?" Marcus's grin was predatory. "Right now, little man, right now." The first week was hell. Min-Seo had known he was weak. 3 years of paralysis had left his muscles atrophied, his reflexes non-existent, his stamina laughable. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it were two different things. Marcus ran him through drills that left him vomiting on the training room floor. Haesuk forced him to analyze and copy skill after skill, minor abilities from other team members, simple combat techniques, basic enhancement spells, until his core screamed in protest and persistent heart had to work overtime just to keep him conscious. But slowly, impossibly, he began to improve. New skills analyzed, 47. Active skill slots, 1. Skill library, 47 abilities available for copying. The numbers were growing. Every time he watched a teammate train, every time he observed a sparring match, every time someone demonstrated their ability for him, the system added another entry to his library. Flame Fist, Blink Step, Corruption Touch, Frost Dance, Lightning Strike, Stone Skin, Wind Walk, Mana Shield. 47 skills, each one a tool he could potentially use. The limitation was still there. 1 slot, downgraded effectiveness. But Min-Seo was learning to work around it. Haesuk taught him to think in terms of combinations, of matching skills to situations rather than relying on a single ability. Marcus taught him to fight without skills at all, to trust his body and his instincts when his mana ran dry. "You're not a mage," Marcus said during one session, after Min-Seo had collapsed for the 5th time. "You're a toolbox. A mage has one big hammer and tries to make every problem look like a nail. You've got 100 different tools, but you can only carry one at a time. So you need to know which tool fits which problem before you pick it up. And if I pick the wrong one," Marcus's expression softened, "then you learn, you survive, and you pick better next time. That's what we do here, Min-Seo. We survive long enough to get it right." 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Min-Seo's body transformed. The pale, trembling cripple who had awakened in that hospital room was gone, replaced by someone lean and corded with muscle, his movements sharp and economical, his eyes holding a focus that hadn't existed before. His core had stabilized at 15% integrity, still dangerously low by any standard, but persistent heart kept him alive, kept him functioning, kept him pushing forward. His skill library had grown to over 300 entries. He'd analyzed abilities from every member of Kang's team, from captured dungeon monsters, from visiting hunters who owed Kang favor. He'd even managed to analyze a few skills from Jinnah during her occasional visits, including Eclipse Blade, now sitting in his library at 47% analysis completion, waiting for the day he could finally copy it. But the skill he used most often wasn't from his library. It was the one he'd created himself. Persistent Heart E rank, active effect, maintaining host vital functions at 15% core efficiency. Secondary effect, slowly regenerating core integrity over time. Estimated time to full recovery, 3.7 years, 3 more years. If he survived that long, his core might actually become something close to normal. It was a distant hope, but it was enough. The mission came without warning. Min-Seo was in the middle of a training session when Kang's voice crackled over the facility's intercom. All hands to briefing room. Code Black. Move. Code Black. The highest priority alert. Min-Seo had heard about it but never experienced it. He was running before he consciously decided to move, his body responding to the urgency in Kang's voice. The briefing room was chaos when he arrived. Marcus and Haesuk were already there, along with a dozen other team members Min-Seo had trained alongside. Kang stood at the front, his face grim, a holographic display showing a map of downtown Seoul. "The sealed one," Kang said without preamble. "It's waking up." The room went silent. Min-Seo felt ice crawl down his spine. The hospital site has been quiet for association sensors showed no activity, no mana fluctuations, nothing. We thought maybe it had gone back to sleep or found another way to manifest. Kang's jaw tight. We were wrong. 30 minutes ago, a residential building 3 blocks from the hospital collapsed. Initial reports suggest a sinkhole, but our underground sensors picked up massive mana displacement. The sealed one is moving, rising, and it's bringing its dreams with. The holographic display shifted, showing thermal imaging of the area. Min-Seo's blood ran cold. The ground beneath the collapsed building was glowing, not with heat, but with corruption. Purple-black tendrils spread outward like veins, reaching toward the surrounding structures. Evacuations are underway, but the association is stretched thin. There are 3 other incidents happening simultaneously across the city. Diversions, we think, to pull resources away from the main threat. Kang's eyes swept the room. Our job is to buy time, to slow it down until the association can mobilize its heavy hitter. We're not here to kill a sealed one. We're here to make sure as many civilians as possible get out alive. Marcus spoke up. What about the boy, the one Min-Seo encountered? Kang's expression darkened. Our scouts report a single humanoid figure standing at the center of the collapsed site. Young, male, smiling. He looked at Min-Seo. He's been waiting for. The room's attention shifted to Min-Seo. He felt the weight of it, the expectation, the fear, the hope. A year of training, 300 skills in his library, a core at 15% and a heart that refused to quit. He thought about the boy's offer, eternal life, unlimited power, the chance to never be weak again. He thought about the speed user's final smile, the flame user's mention of his wife, the little girl with the stuffed rabbit, who he'd later learned survived because of the 3 seconds he'd bought her. "I'm ready," Min-Seo said. Kang studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Gear up. We move in 10. The ride to the site was silent. Min-Seo sat in the armored transport, running through his skill library in his mind. Flame fist for offense, blink step for mobility, corruption touch for understanding, stone skin for defense, wind walk for speed, eclipse blade for when nothing else worked. 300 options, 1 slot. He'd have to choose in the moment, adapt on the fly, trust his training. Beside him, Marcus crackled with contained lightning. Haesuk's breath misted in the air, frost forming on her fingertips. Other team members checked their weapons, their skills, their gear. They were F ranks and E ranks, the forgotten and the discarded, riding towards something that could kill them all without effort. And yet no one hesitated. The transport stopped, the doors opened, and Min-Seo stepped out into hell. The building had collapsed inward, leaving a crater where it once stood. From that crater, purple-black light pulsed like a heartbeat, each pulse sending waves of corruption through the ground. The tendrils Kang had shown on the hologram were real, thick cables of darkness that burrowed through concrete and asphalt, reaching hungrily toward the evacuation zone. And at the center, standing on a platform of solidified corruption, was the boy. He looked the same as Min-Seo remembered, young, innocent, wrong. His black eyes found Min-Seo immediately and his smile widened. "You came," the boy said, his layered voice carrying across the distance. "I knew you would, the dream told me." He spread his arms, gesturing at the destruction around them. "Beautiful, isn't it? 1,000 years of sleeping, and this is what I wake up to. Humans, so fragile, so temporary. And yet," his eyes fixed on Min-Seo, "so persistent." Min-Seo stepped forward, ignoring Marcus's warning hand. "Let them go. The civilians, the ones you're not controlling. Let them leave and we'll talk. The boy laughed that horrible, layered sound. Talk. Little copycat, I didn't come here to talk. I came here to offer you one last chance. He raised a hand and the corruption tendrils pulsed brighter. Join me, accept the dream fully. Let it remake you into what you were always meant to be. An F-rank with a useless skill surviving against all odds, don't you see? That's not weakness, that's evolution. You're the next step, Min-Seo. The first of a new kind, and I can help you become more. Min-Seo felt the whisper again, sliding into his mind like oil. Say yes, let go, become. For a moment, just a moment, he wanted to. The offer was so tempting. No more pain, no more limitation, no more watching people die while he struggled to save them. But then he thought about persistent heart, about the skill he'd created from pure refusal to give up, about the 300 abilities in his library, each one proof that he could learn, could grow, could become something new without losing himself. I already am more, Min-Seo said. I'm what happens when an F-rank refuses to stay down. I'm what happens when a useless skill finds its purpose. I'm Lee Min-Seo, and I don't need your dream to be whole. The boy's smile faltered. For the first time, something like confusion flickered in his ancient eyes. Then you'll die, he said. Here, now, with everyone you tried to save. He raised both hands and the corruption tendrils erupted from the ground, lashing toward the evacuation teams, toward the fleeing civilians, toward Min-Seo and his team. Min-Seo didn't move. Instead, he opened his skill library and made his choice. Copy skill. Eclipse blade S-rank right arrow A-rank. The knowledge of cutting, true cutting, the kind that severed space itself, flooded into him. His hand went to the weapon at his hip. A simple combat blade Marcus had given him months ago. He drew it in one motion, and as he did, he poured everything into the swing. Not just his mana, not just the copied skill, but every moment of pain, every second of refusal, every beat of persistent heart. The blade flashed, and the corruption tendrils fell, severed at the root. The boy stared, his mouth opening in disbelief. That's impossible. Your core can't handle an S-rank skill. You should be dead. Min-Seo looked down at his hand. They were trembling, his core was screaming, but he was still standing, still alive, still fighting. Persistent heart, he said quietly. My skill, it doesn't just keep me alive, it learns, adapts, grows. He looked up, meeting the boy's ancient eyes. Every time I should die, it finds a way to hold on. Every time my core should collapse, it finds a way to keep. You offered me eternal life, but I've had it all along. I just didn't know it. The boy's face twisted, rage, confusion, and something that might have been fear. Then I'll tear it out of you myself. I'll unmake your core, destroy your heart, scatter your atoms across. You'll do nothing. The new voice came from behind Min-Seo. He turned to find Yu Jinna descending from the sky, her eclipse blade drawn and blazing with S-rank power. Behind her came more hunters, dozens of them from every guild in Seoul, their auras lighting up the night like stars. The association mobilized, Jinna said, landing beside Min-Seo. Took them long enough, but they're here. The sealed one's diversions failed. The real threat is this one, and we're going to put it back in its hole. The boy looked at the assembled hunters, then back at Min-Seo. His expression shifted, the rage fading, replaced by something almost like respect. You've changed things, Copycat, he said. The dream didn't account for you. It doesn't know what to do with people who refuse to break. He stepped backward into the pulsing light of the corruption. This isn't over. When I wake again, truly wake, I'll find you, and we'll finish this. The light flared and he was gone. The corruption tendrils writhed one last time, then collapsed into dust. In the aftermath, Min-Seo sat on a chunk of broken concrete, watching the cleanup crews work. His core was barely at 5%, persistent heart working overtime to keep him conscious. But he was alive. The evacuation had succeeded. The team had survived. Jinna sat down beside him. You did well. I copied your skill, Min-Seo said. Eclipse blade, it's in my library now. She smiled. Good, you'll need it when he comes back. Min-Seo nodded. The boy's words echoed in his mind. When I wake again, truly wake. There would be a next time. A real fight without diversions or half measures. But that was for another day. For now he was alive. His team was alive. The civilians were safe. And Lee Min-Seo, the F-rank with a useless skill, had just proven that sometimes the strongest thing in the world was simply refusing to let go. The copycat would be ready. When the dream finally woke, he'd be there to meet it. The days that followed the battle blurred into a haze of recovery debriefing. Min-Seo spent most of them in the medical wing of Kang's facility, his core slowly regenerating under Persistent Heart's relentless care. The skill had grown again during the fight, not in rank, but in depth. It understood him now in ways it hadn't before, anticipating his needs, allocating his meager mana reserves with surgical precision. Persistent Heart E rank, core integrity, 18% and rising. Estimated time to full recovery, 2.1 years. The number had improved. Every battle, every near-death experience, every moment of refusal seemed to accelerate the healing process. Min-Seo was beginning to suspect that Persistent Heart wasn't just keeping him alive, it was learning how to make him stronger. He wasn't the only one who had changed. The team had lost 2 members in the fight. Their names were Park Sung-ho and Kim Jae-yoon, F ranks both, with skills that had seemed minor until the moment they'd thrown themselves between civilians and corruption tendril. Sung-ho's skill, iron will, had let him withstand pain that would have killed anyone else. He'd used it to hold a collapsing doorway open long enough for 30 people to escape. Jae-yoon's skill, gentle breeze, had been dismissed as useless for combat, until she'd used it to push corruptive gases away from evacuation routes, breathing in enough herself to buy others time. They died as heroes, but more importantly, they died as people who mattered. Min-Seo attended their memorial service in the facility's main hall. Every member of the team was there, along with representatives from several guilds who'd heard the story. Jin-ah came, standing silently beside him as names were read and memories shared. Even Inspector Kang, usually so controlled, had tears in his eyes when he spoke about the 2 recruited years ago, when no one else would take them. "This is why we fight," Kang said at the service's end. "Not for rank, not for glory, not for the association's approval. We fight because every person in this room matters, because the system that wrote us off was wrong, because Park Sung-ho and Kim Jae-yoon proved that worth isn't measured in mana capacity or skill tier. It's measured in what you're willing to give for others." The word stayed with Min-Seo long after the service ended. 3 weeks later, he was cleared for light duty. The team had new recruits to train, F ranks and E ranks who'd heard about what they did and wanted to be part of it. Min-Seo found himself in the unusual position of being a senior member, despite having joined only a year ago. His experience, his skill library, his ability to analyze and teach others about their own abilities, all of it made him valuable in ways that had nothing to do with combat. He stood in the training hall, watching a group of new arrivals work through basic drills. Marcus was putting them through their paces, his voice booming encouragement and criticism equal measure. Hae-suk moved among them, offering quiet corrections, helping them find the rhythm of their skill. "You're good at this." Min-Seo turned to find Kang beside him, watching the new recruits with a satisfied expression. "At what?" "Teaching, leading, making people believe they can be more than they are." Kang's eyes met his. "You know what that's worth, in a world that spends all its time telling people they're not good enough." Min-Seo thought about it, about the 3 years he'd spent as a cripple, being told he was useless, about the moment he'd awakened to an F-rank skill that everyone dismissed, about the battles he'd fought, the skills he'd copied, the lives he'd touched. "It's worth everything," he said quietly. Kang nodded. "That's what I thought you'd say." The summons came a month later. Min-Seo was in the middle of a training session with a new recruit, a girl named Cha Yi-won, whose skill allowed her to create small pockets of slowed time. Useless in combat, she'd been told. A parlor trick. But Min-Seo had spent weeks working, helping her understand that time manipulation, even on a small scale, was one of the rarest and most valuable abilities in existence. "Imagine," he'd told her, "what happens when an enemy's attack enters your It slows down. You can dodge it, counter it, redirect it. Imagine what happens when you apply it to a falling building, giving people seconds more to escape. Imagine what happens when you layer it with other skills. My blink step, for example. Do you see?" Yi-won's eyes had lit up with understanding. It was the same look Min-Seo had seen on his own face months ago, when Hae-suk had first explained skill combinations. Now, as Kang's voice crackled over the intercom, Min-Seo felt a familiar tension settle into his muscles. "Min-Seo to briefing room. Priority Alpha. Priority Alpha. Not as high as Code Black but close. Something important. Something that couldn't wait." He found Kang alone in the briefing room, staring at a holographic display. The image showed a map of the Korean peninsula, with a single red marker pulsing near the east coast. "What is it?" Min-Seo asked. Kang didn't turn. Remember the boy, what he said at the end, about waking again, truly waking. Min-Seo's blood chilled. He's back. Not him, something else. Kang expanded the display, showing seismic data, mana readings, thermal imaging. There's a sealed site near the coast, been dormant for 800 years. 3 days ago it started showing activity. Not much, a few mana spikes, some minor seismic events. The association wrote it off as natural fluctuation. He paused, his jaw tightening. This morning the activity stopped, completely, like someone flipped a switch. And that's bad. In my experience, when something ancient suddenly goes quiet, it's not because it went back to sleep. It's because it's about to wake up. Kang finally turned to face him. The boy's sealed one was one of many. There are dozens buried across the peninsula, maybe 100 if they're all starting to stir. Min-Seo understood. The hospital incident wasn't isolated. It was a test, a probe, seeing how we'd respond. That's my theory. Kang's expression was grim. And if I'm right, we're not dealing with one sealed one anymore. We're dealing with an awakening, a coordinated one. The weight of it settled over Min-Seo like a physical thing. He thought about the boy's ancient eyes, his layered voice, his offer of eternal life. He thought about the corruption tendrils, the infected hunters, the civilians who died despite everything. One sealed one had nearly destroyed a hospital and brought Seoul to the brink. Dozen. What do we do? Kang was quiet for a long moment. Then, we prepare, we train, we build, and we reach out to every F rank, every E rank, every forgotten hunter in the country. Because if this is what I think it is, we're going to need everyone, not just the S ranks and A ranks. Everyone. He pulled up another display. A list of names, thousands of them, each with associated skill data and location. The association has records on every registered hunter. Most of the low-rank data gets ignored, archived, forgotten. But I've been cross-referencing skills, looking for pattern. People with abilities that seem useless but might have hidden potential. People like you, like Yi-won, like Sung-ho and Jae-yoon. His voice caught slightly on the last two names. There are more of us than they realize, way more. Min-Seo stared at the list. Thousands of names, thousands of forgotten hunters, each with a skill the system had dismissed, each with potential no one had bothered to unlock. We find them, he said slowly. We bring them here, we train them, and when the sealed ones wake, we show them what the forgotten can do, Kang finished. Together, the next 6 months were the most intense of Min-Seo's life. Recruits poured into the facility. F ranks from every corner of the country, E ranks who'd given up on ever mattering, D ranks whose guilds had discarded them after injury. Some came willingly, drawn by rumors of the team that had fought a sealed one and survived. Others needed convincing, their spirits broken by years of dismissal and neglect. A few had to be brought in by force, their skills too valuable to leave untrained, their potential too great to waste. Min-Seo trained them all. He worked with fire users whose flames barely flicker, teaching them to focus their mana into precision rather than power. He worked with speedsters whose bodies couldn't sustain enhancement, showing them how to use blink steps principles in short, devastating bursts. He worked with healers whose skills barely registered, helping them understand that healing wasn't just about mending flesh. It was about holding on, about refusing to let go, about the power of persistence. And slowly, impossibly, they grew. Skill library updated. 1,247 entry. Active skill slots, 1. Analysis completion rate, optimized. The library was becoming unwieldy, over 1,000 skills, each with its own nuances and requirements. Min-Seo had developed a mental filing system, categorizing abilities by type, rank, and situational usefulness. He could access any of them in seconds, evaluate their potential applications, and decide whether to copy them into his active slot. But he was also learning something else, something the system hadn't told him. When he trained others, when he helped them understand their skills, something happened to those skills. They became clearer in his library, more detailed, almost as if teaching them strengthened his connection to them. New feature unlocked, skill resonance. Description. Through deep understanding and teaching of analyzed skills, host can temporarily enhance copied versions by 1 rank. Duration and effectiveness scale with depth of understanding. 1 rank. A D rank skill became C rank. A C rank became B rank. It wasn't the same as having a naturally high-rank core, but it was something no one else could do. Min-Seo began teaching with renewed intensity, pouring himself into every recruit, every skill, every breakthrough. And as he taught, he felt himself changing, growing, becoming something more than an F-rank with a copying ability. He was becoming a catalyst. The first true test came without warning. Min-Seo was in the middle of a session with helping her refine a new technique, layering her time-slow field with a copied version of Blink Step to create what she called frozen moments. The results were promising. She could now slow incoming attacks to a crawl while simultaneously repositioning herself, making her nearly untouchable in close combat. Then the alarms went off. Not the facility's internal alarms. These were citywide, their wailing carrying through the walls from the world above. Min-Seo's blood ran cold. He'd heard recordings of these alarms during training. They were reserved for one thing only: dungeon break, multiple dungeon breaks, catastrophic level. Kang's voice blasted over the intercom seconds later. All hands to deployment. This is not a drill. Sealed one activity at 3 locations simultaneous: Busan, Daegu, and Incheon. We're splitting into team. Move. The facility exploded into action. Hunters poured from every doorway, grabbing gear, checking skills, forming into pre-assigned groups. Min-Seo found himself at the center of it, his team now forming around him automatically. Marcus crackling with lightning, Hae-suk frost forming at her fingertips. Yi-won, her eyes focused, her time field already humming. A dozen others, each with skills the world had dismissed, each ready to prove the world wrong. Busan, Kang said, appearing beside Min-Seo. That's your target. The sealed one there is different from the boy, older, more established. It's already manifested partially, and the association's forces are struggling. They've requested all available assets. We're assets now, Min-Seo asked, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Kang's expression didn't change, but something warm flickered in his eyes. You've always been assets. The world just didn't know it yet. Now go. Show them what the Forgotten can do. The transport touched down on the outskirts of Busan. 30 minutes later, the city was burning. Not literally, the fires were contained for now, but the chaos was visible everywhere. Streets were clogged with fleeing civilians. Emergency vehicles screamed past, their sirens joining the constant wail of alarms. And in the distance, rising above the skyline like a malignant flower, was the sealed one. It wasn't humanoid like the boy. This was something else entirely, a mass of shifting darkness, tentacles and eyes and mouths forming and dissolving in constant flux. Corruption radiated from it in waves, each pulse sending tendrils reaching toward the city below. Hunters swarmed around it like angry insects, their attacks barely slowing its advance. Min-Seo's team deployed immediately, spreading out to cover evacuation routes and engage corrupted hunters on the ground. But Min-Seo himself stood frozen for a moment, his eyes fixed on the sealed one. New skill detected. Abyssal Touch S rank. Analysis progress 0.01%. Estimated completion NA. Warning: target skill is beyond current analysis capability. Partial analysis may be possible at significant risk to host. Partial analysis. Significant risk. Min-Seo understood what the system was telling him. This sealed one was so far above his level that trying to understand it could destroy him. But partial analysis meant partial understanding, and partial understanding might be enough to find a weakness. He thought about Sung-ho and Jae-yoon, about the recruits he'd trained, the skills he'd unlocked, the potential he'd helped realize. He thought about persistent heart, beating steadily in his chest, refusing to let him go. I'm not done yet, he whispered. None of us are. He opened his skill library and made his choice. Copy skill. Eclipse Blade S-rank right arrow A-rank. Activating skill resonance. Eclipse Blade A-rank right arrow S-rank. For one glorious, terrible moment, Min-Seo felt what it meant to be S-rank. The power was overwhelming. A million possibilities unfolding in his mind. A billion paths through space and time. The ability to cut anything, anywhere, anytime. His body screamed in protest, his core threatening to shatter, but persistent heart held on, adapted, refused to break. He raised his blade, and he cut. The battle lasted 17 hours. By the end, Min-Seo had collapsed 4 times, each time dragged back from the brink by persistent heart's relentless refusal to quit. He'd copied and discarded over 50 skills, adapting to every threat, countering every attack, holding the line when stronger hunters fell. His team had fought beside him every step of the way, Marcus burning through corrupted hordes with lightning, Haesuk freezing tendrils mid-strike, Yi-1 slowing time to give civilians seconds more to escape. They'd lost 3 more members. Their names were added to the memorial wall. But they'd won. The sealed one didn't die, couldn't die, not truly. But it was driven back, forced to retreat into its seal. The association's heavy hitters arrived in the final hour, pouring firepower into the wound Min-Seo had opened until the thing had no choice but to withdraw. When the last corruption tendril dissolved and the last wave of darkness receded, Min-Seo was lying on broken concrete, staring up at a sky that was finally, blessedly clear. Jinnah found him there. She was battered and bleeding, her Eclipse Guild uniform torn, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been pride. "You cut it," she said, sinking down beside him. "An S-rank sealed one. You actually cut it." Min-Seo tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "Copied your skill. Hope you don't mind." "I mind that you almost killed yourself using it." But she was smiling. "That's 3 times now. 3 times you've stared down something that should have killed you and refused to die. People are starting to notice." "People?" She gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. "The association, the guilds, the media. Word spreads when an F-rank leads a team into a sealed one battle and comes out alive. You're becoming famous, Min-Seo. The copycat who won't quit." He closed his eyes, letting the exhaustion wash over him. Famous. It was a strange thought. 3 years ago he'd been invisible. Now he had a team, a purpose, a skill that had grown from useless to miraculous, and a heart that refused to stop beating no matter what the world threw at it. "What happens now?" he asked. Jinnah was quiet for a moment. "Now we rest, we recover, we mourn our dead and celebrate our living, and then—" She looked toward the horizon where the first light of dawn was beginning to show. "Then we prepare for the next one. There are more sealed ones, Min-Seo, dozens of, and if they're all waking up, we're going to need every hunter we can find, every rank, every skill, every person willing to fight." Min-Seo opened his eyes, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful, hopeful, a promise of something better. "Then we find them," he said, "all of them, and we show them what they can become." 6 months later, the first gathering took place. Kang's facility couldn't hold them all anymore. They'd expanded into adjacent warehouses, then into underground levels, then into an entire complex that had once been a military installation. Thousands of hunters now called it home, F-ranks and E-ranks and D-ranks, the forgotten and discarded, united by a single purpose. Min-Seo stood on a platform at the center of the main training hall, looking out at the crowd. Marcus was beside him, crackling with barely contained energy. Haesuk stood on his other side, frost patterns forming and dissolving on her skin. Yi-1 was somewhere in the crowd, her time field humming as she helped newer recruits understand their ability. Jinnah had come, representing Eclipse Guild and the growing alliance of high-rankers who believed in their cause. Even Inspector Kang was there, watching from the shadows with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "I'm not supposed to be," Min-Seo began, his voice carrying through the hall's acoustics. "According to every metric the association uses, I shouldn't exist. F-rank core, useless skill, 3 years of paralysis that should have killed me. By all rights, I should be dead or forgotten or both." The crowd was silent, listening. "But I'm not dead, I'm not forgotten. I'm standing here in front of all of you because I refused to give up. Because when the world told me I was nothing, I decided to be something anyway." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the faces before him. Young and old, scarred and fresh, scared and determined. "And I look at you and I see the same thing. Every single person in this room was told they weren't good enough, that their skills were useless, that they didn't matter." He raised his voice. "They were wrong." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "The sealed ones are waking. The world is changing. And the hunters who are going to matter most aren't the S-ranks with their flashy abilities and guild backing. They're the ones who have spent their whole lives being told no. The ones who have had to fight for every scrap of respect. The ones who know what it means to be invisible, and who have decided to be visible anyway." He drew his blade, not to fight but to hold up as a symbol. "My skill is Copycat. Useless, they said, a parlor trick. But I've used it to copy over 2,000 abilities. I've used it to fight sealed one. I've used it to save lives, and I've learned something along the way." He looked at Marcus, at Haesuk, at Yi-1, at every face in the crowd. "The skills we have aren't limitations. They're opportunities. Every so-called useless ability is a door waiting to be opened. Every F rank is a potential S rank if they just find the right key. The murmur became a cheer. Min-Seo let it wash over him, feeling the energy, the hope, the determination. When the sealed ones come, and they will come, we'll be ready. Not because we're the strongest, not because we have the biggest cores or the flashiest skills. We'll be ready because we know what it means to fight when no one believes in you. We'll be ready because we've spent our whole lives refusing to give up. He raised his blade higher. And when the darkness tries to take this world, we'll be there. The forgotten, the discarded, the ones who never stopped holding on. We'll be there and we'll show them what persistence really means. The cheer that followed shook the walls. That night, Min-Seo sat alone on the facility's rooftop, looking up at the stars. His core was at 34% now, still weak, still fragile but growing. Persistent heart beat steadily in his chest, a constant reminder of how far he'd come. Footsteps behind him, he didn't turn. "You've done something remarkable," Kang said, settling down beside him. "Built something that matters, gave people hope. It wasn't just me. No, but it started with you. That moment in the hospital when you refused to let Jinnah die. That was the first crack in the wall. Everything since has been built on that foundation." Kang was quiet for a moment. "The association wants to meet you, formally. They're finally admitting that their classification system has blind spots." Min-Seo smiled slightly. "And what did you tell them?" "That I'd ask, that you'd probably say yes but on your own terms. That you don't work for them, you work with them when it serves your people." Kang's voice held a note of pride. "You've got leverage now, Min-Seo. Use it wisely." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. "I saw the boy again," Min-Seo said quietly. "In the battle, not physically, but in the corruption. He was watching, through the sealed one's eyes." Kang tensed. "What did he say?" "That we'd meet again, when he's truly ready, when the dream fully wakes." Min-Seo's voice was calm, accepting. "He's not afraid of us, he's curious. He wants to see what we become." "And what will you become?" Min-Seo thought about it. About the 2,000 skills in his library. About the thousands of hunters who now look to him for guidance. About the battles ahead, the losses to come, the impossible odds they'd face. "I'll become what I've always been," he said finally. "Someone who refuses to let go. Someone who holds on no matter what. Someone who takes useless things and makes them matter." Kang nodded slowly. "That's enough, that's more than enough." Below them, the facility hummed with life. Hunters trained, planned, prepared. Skills were analyzed, combined, optimized. The forgotten were remembering who they were. And in the darkness beneath the world, ancient things stirred in their sleep, dreaming of the day they would wake. Min-Seo looked at the stars and smiled. "Let them come." The final awakening came without warning, as final things often do. Min-Seo was in the middle of a training session with a new recruit when the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. Not the subtle vibration of distant construction or passing vehicle, but a deep, rhythmic pulse that seemed to originate from the very core of the earth. It felt like a heartbeat, like something enormous and ancient was stirring from a sleep that had lasted millennia. Around him, the facility erupted into chaos. Alarms blared. Hunters ran for their gear. Kang's voice cut through the noise over the intercom, but his words were lost in the sudden, overwhelming pressure that flooded Min-Seo's senses. "Warning, massive mana fluctuation detected. Multiple sources, 47 sealed locations simultaneously activating. Estimated threat level, catastrophic. 47. Min-Seo's blood ran cold. They'd known there were dozens, but 47 waking at once was beyond anything they'd prepared for. This wasn't a series of incidents or a coordinated probing. This was the real thing, the final thing. He ran for the briefing room, his team falling in around him automatically. Marcus's lightning was already crackling, his face set in grim determination. Haesuk moved like ice itself, her expression frozen but her eyes burning. Yiwon's time field hummed at maximum extension, slowing the chaos around them just enough to think clearly. Dozens of others followed, the hunters Min-Seo had trained, the forgotten he'd helped remember their worth. Kang was waiting in the briefing room, but he wasn't alone. Jinnah stood beside him, her eclipse blade drawn and blazing. Behind her were representatives from every major guild in Korea, S ranks and A ranks, the elite of the elite. They looked at Min-Seo as he entered, and for the first time he didn't see dismissal in their eyes. He saw respect, acknowledgement, equality. The sealed ones are waking, Kang said without preamble. All of them, simultaneously. This isn't a coincidence or a natural phenomenon, it's coordinated, intentional. The boy, Min-Seo said. It wasn't a question. Jinan nodded grimly. He's the key. The first to wake, the one who's been watching, learning, preparing. The others are following his lead. If we can stop him, we might be able to disrupt the connection and drive the rest back into their seal. And if we can't, no one answered. They didn't need to. Min-Seo looked at the map on the holographic display. 47 red markers scattered across the peninsula. Each one represented a sealed one awakening, a city under threat, thousands of lives hanging in the balance. The association's forces were already deploying, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. They couldn't stop all of them, but maybe they didn't have to. Divide and conquer won't work, Min-Seo said, stepping forward. We don't have enough high-rank hunters to cover 47 sites. And even if we did, the moment we engage one sealed one, the others will advance. We'll be spread too thin to make a difference anywhere. Kang's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? Min-Seo turned to the guild representatives. You have teams, experienced hunters with powerful skills. But you've always operated independently, each guild protecting its own territory. That won't work today. An S-rank hunter from one of the major guilds stepped forward, his expression skeptical. And you have a better idea, F-rank. The words carried old contempt, but Min-Seo didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. He'd survived worse. I have 1,000 hunters, he said quietly. F-ranks, E-ranks, D-ranks. The ones your guilds rejected, the ones your system forgot. They're not as strong as you individually, but they're trained to work together, to combine skills, to be where they're needed most, not where their rank says they should be. He pulled up a secondary display, showing the locations of Kang's facility and the satellite training centers they'd established over the past months. Send your high rankers to the biggest threats, the sealed ones that can't be stopped by anyone else. Leave the rest to us. My people will be at every site, supporting evacuations, containing corruption, holding the line until you can rotate to help. We won't defeat the sealed ones alone, but we'll make sure your teams can. The S-rank hunter studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. You've earned the right to be heard, Copycat. We'll coordinate. But if your people fall, they won't fall, Min-Seo said. They've spent their whole lives being told they're not good enough. They've got something to prove. And trust me, when people like that find something worth fighting for, they don't break. The next hours were a blur of motion and chaos. Min-Seo's team deployed to the most critical secondary site, a sealed one awakening in the heart of a medium-sized city, too far from the major guilds to receive immediate support, too populated to ignore. The thing that rose from the earth was different from the boy and different from the Busan horror. It was all angles and sharp edges, a crystalline structure that caught light and twisted it in painful shapes. Corruption radiated from it in geometric pattern, each pulse creating corrupted hunters from anyone caught within its field. By the time Min-Seo arrived, the city was already falling. He stood at the edge of the evacuation zone, watching civilians stream past while hunters fought to hold the line. His team fanned out around him, ready to engage, but Min-Seo's eyes were fixed on the sealed one and on the figure standing before it. The boy. He looked different now, older, taller. His body had grown, matured, as if the year since their last meeting had accelerated his development. But his eyes were the same, ancient, knowing, hungry. He was waiting, watching, smiling. You came, the boy called, his layered voice carrying across the chaos. I knew you would. You always come. You always hold on. He spread his arms, gesturing at the destruction around them. Look at this place. Look at what we've built together. Your resistance, my awakening. A beautiful dance, don't you think? Min-Seo walked forward, his team moving with him. This isn't a dance, it's murder, and it ends today. The boy laughed, that horrible, beautiful sound. Ends, little Copycat, nothing ends, it only transforms. You should know that better than anyone. Look what you've become since we first met. A leader, a symbol, a heart that won't stop beating. His eyes glittered. I gave you that. The dream gave you that. Every time you should have died, something held on. Something refused to let go. That was us, Min-Seo. That was always. Min-Seo felt the words like physical blows. Was it true? Had his survival, his growth, his very persistence been shaped by the sealed one's influence. He thought about persistent heart, about the skill that had evolved from his own desperation. It was his. It had to be his. Wasn't it? Warning, corruption influence detected. Source, sealed one manifestation. Effect, undermining host confidence, creating doubt. Countermeasure, activate skill resonance with persistent heart. The notification snapped him back to reality. He felt the corruption trying to worm its way into his mind, trying to make him believe that his victories weren't his own. But persistent heart beat stronger, clearer, pushing back against the darkness. No, Min-Seo said. You didn't give me anything. You offered. I refused. Every skill in my library, every life I've saved, every hunter I've trained, that's mine. That's ours. You don't get to take credit for what we've built. The boy's smile flickered. For just a moment, something like frustration crossed his ancient features. Then I'll take it by force, he said. I'll tear it out of you and scatter the pieces. I'll show you what happens to insects who think they can defy kings. He raised his hand, and the crystalline sealed one behind him surged forward, its geometric corruption spreading in waves. Min-Seo didn't move. Instead, he opened his skill library, 2,317 entries now, each one analyzed, understood, resonant. He didn't choose one. He chose them all. Warning, attempting to copy multiple skills simultaneously. Estimated core strain, fatal. Proceed. Proceed. The world exploded into light. Min-Seo had never understood what his skill truly was until that moment. Copycat wasn't about imitation. It wasn't about borrowing power or temporarily using abilities that belonged to others. It was about connection, about understanding the essence of a skill so deeply that it became part of him, about resonance, the way skills could combine, amplify, transform when they were truly understood. As he drew on his entire library at once, he felt every hunter he'd ever trained. Marcus's lightning, Haisuk's frost, Yiwon's time, Jinna's eclipse blade, and thousands more, each skill a thread connecting him to someone who had been told they were useless, who had chosen to matter anyway. The threads wove together into a tapestry of pure, defiant existence, and at the center of it all was persistent heart, beating stronger than ever, refusing to let go. The boy's eyes widened. What? What are you doing? That should kill you. Your core can't. My core doesn't matter, Min-Seo said. My heart does. He raised his blade, not Jinna's eclipse blade now, but something new, something forged from every skill he'd ever copied, every life he'd ever touched, every moment of refusal that had brought him here. It blazed with light that was every color and none, that burned with the warmth of 1,000 hearts refusing to stop. This is what you never understood, Min-Seo said, walking toward the boy. You think power comes from strength, from rank, from being feared, but it doesn't. It comes from connection, from people who believe in each other, from hearts that beat together. The crystalline sealed one lunged, its geometric corruption reaching for him. Min-Seo swung his blade. The light that erupted wasn't destruction. It was understanding. He didn't cut the sealed one. He didn't fight it. He connected with it, reached into its ancient, alien consciousness and showed it what he'd learned. Not power, not fear, just the simple, stubborn truth of existence. The refusal to give up, the choice to matter. The sealed one froze. Its crystalline form flickered, wavered, and then slowly began to change. The sharp angles softened. The geometric corruption dissolved. And from its heart something new emerged, not a monster but a memory. A fragment of what it had been before the corruption, before the sealing, before the millennia of isolation and hatred. It remembered being something other than a sealed one. The boy stared, his ancient face contorting with emotions he couldn't name. No, no, that's not possible. You can't. You're just an F-rank. You're nothing. I'm everything, Min-Seo said. I'm every hunter who was told they didn't matter and decided to matter anyway. I'm every skill that was called useless and found its purpose. I'm every heart that refused to stop beating, no matter what the world threw at it. He raised his blade one last time. And you're just a dream, a nightmare that forgot it could be something more. The blade fell. When the light faded, the boy was gone, not destroyed. Min-Seo understood now that destruction wasn't the answer, but transformed. The ancient consciousness that had worn a child's face for so long had been shown something it had forgotten. The possibility of connection, of growth, of becoming more than what it was. It had retreated into its seal, not defeated but reconsidering, dreaming different dreams. The crystalline sealed one had collapsed into inert stone, its corruption neutralized. Around the city, the waves of geometric darkness were receding, the corrupted hunters returning to themselves with confused, wondering eyes. Min-Seo stood at the center of it all, his body trembling, his core screaming, his heart beating its persistent rhythm. He was dimly aware of his team gathering around him, of Marcus's massive hand on his shoulder, of Haisuk's frost cooling his burning skin, of Yiwon's time field slowing the world just enough for him to breathe. "You did it," Jinna said, appearing beside him. Her eyes were wet. "You actually did it." "We did it," Min-Seo corrected, his voice barely a whisper. "All of us." He looked at the sky. The dawn was breaking, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere across the peninsula, 46 other battles were being fought, 46 other sealed ones were being confronted. Some would be won, some would be lost. But the tide had turned. The dream was over. The waking world had begun. 3 months later, Min-Seo stood on the roof of Kang's facility, watching the sunset. His core was at 67% now, still not fully healed but stronger than it had ever been. Persistent heart had evolved again during the final battle, learning to draw on the connections he'd forged with other hunters. It wasn't just his heart anymore, it was theirs too. Persistent heart D rank, new effect, resonance network. Host can draw limited mana and skill knowledge from hunters who have trained with, creating temporary skill combinations and shared ability. Network size, 2,847 hunters and growing. Footsteps behind him, he didn't turn. "You're famous now," Kang said, settling down beside him. "Really famous. The copycat who faced down a sealed 1-1. The F-rank who built an army from the forgotten. They're writing books about you, making documentary." Min-Seo smiled slightly. "They're missing the point." "What's the point?" "That it wasn't me. It was everyone who refused to give up. Everyone who kept fighting when the world said they couldn't." He looked at Kang. "Sung-Ho and Jae-yoon, the ones we lost. They're part of this too. Their refusal to let go, their choice to matter, that's what built the foundation. The rest of us just built on it." Kang was quiet for a moment. Then, "The association wants to revise the classification system. Officially, they're creating new categories for skill types, new training programs for low-rank hunter. Your people are going to be integrated into the official response structure." "Is that good?" "It's progress." Kang's voice held a note of satisfaction. "It's what you fought for, what we all fought for. The forgotten are forgotten no more." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. "The boys sealed one," Min-Seo said finally. "It's still there, still dreaming, but different dreams now. I can feel it sometimes, a presence at the edge of my consciousness. Not threatening, just watching, learning, the way I learned from it." Kang's expression sharpened. "Is that dangerous?" "Maybe, maybe not." Min-Seo thought about the moment of connection, the understanding that had passed between them. It remembered something in that battle, what it was before the corruption. I think it might want to remember more, to become something else. Something that isn't just a nightmare. And if it does, then we'll be there to help, to guide, to show it what connection means." Min-Seo smiled. "That's what we do now, isn't it? Take things that were broken and help them become whole." Kang laughed, a real laugh, warm and surprised. "Listen to you, the cripple who woke up with a useless skill, talking about helping ancient horrors find themselves. You've come a long way, Min-Seo. We all have." The memorial wall had grown. 47 names now, etched into polished stone in the facility's main hall. Each one a hunter who had fallen in the final battle, who had chosen to matter and paid the ultimate price. Min-Seo visited it every day, running his fingers over the letters, remembering faces, voices, moments of connection. Sung-Ho, Jae-yoon, and now 45 more. But the wall wasn't just for mourning. It was for remembering, for honoring, for carrying forward. Beside the wall, a new addition had been built, a training hall dedicated to skill combination and resonance. Hunters from every rank trained there together, learning to weave their abilities into something greater than the sum of their parts. F-ranks worked alongside S-ranks, their skills complementing and amplifying each other in ways the old system had never imagined. Yi-won was teaching there now, her time field creating opportunities for split-second coordination that would have been impossible otherwise. Marcus ran the physical conditioning program, his lightning serving as both threat and motivation. Haisuk led the tactical division, her frost patterns becoming the basis for new combination techniques. And Min-Seo taught, connected, built. His skill library had grown to over 5,000 entries. Every hunter who passed through the facility contributed their abilities for analysis, their knowledge for sharing. He'd become a living archive of hunter skills, a repository of techniques and combinations that anyone could access through him. But more importantly, he'd become a symbol, not of power but of possibility, of what could happen when someone refused to accept the limits the world placed on them. 1 year later, Min-Seo stood before the largest gathering of hunters in Korean history. They filled a stadium now, not a hidden facility but a public arena, recognized and celebrated. Tens of thousands of hunters from every rank, every guild, every background, and beyond them millions watched through broadcasts, their eyes on the young man who had changed everything. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. 1 year ago, he began, his voice carrying through the arena speakers. The sealed ones woke, 47 ancient horrors rising to destroy everything we'd built. By every calculation we should have lost. By every metric the old system used, we were outmatched, outranked, outclassed. He paused, letting the silence stretch. But we didn't lose. Do you know why? He looked out at the sea of faces. F ranks and S ranks standing together, guild leaders and forgotten hunters, side by side, people who had once been told they didn't matter, now mattering more than they'd ever imagined. Because we stopped listening to the metrics. We stopped caring about rank. We started seeing each other not as classifications but as people, as hearts that could beat together, as skills that could combine into something greater. He raised his hand, and around him, thousands of hunters raised theirs in response. We built something new, not a system of ranks and tiers but a network of connection and support, not a hierarchy of power but a community of purpose. And when the darkness came, we faced it together. He thought about Sung-ho and Jae-yoon, about every name on the memorial wall, about the boy who had become something more, and the sealed ones who were learning to dream different dreams. This isn't the end, Min-Seo said. It's the beginning. The sealed ones are still there, still dreaming, still changing. New threats will come, new challenges will arise, but we'll face them the same way we faced this one together, connected, refusing to let go. He let his eyes sweep the crowd one last time. That's what we are now, not F rank or S rank, not useless or powerful, just us. Hearts that won't stop beating, people who refuse to give up, a family built from the forgotten standing together against the dark. The cheer that followed shook the stadium to its foundation. That night Min-Seo sat alone on the roof of the facility, the original one, not the new complex, watching the stars. His core was at 89% now, almost normal, almost healed. Persistent heart beat steadily in his chest, a constant reminder of where he'd come from and what he'd become. Footsteps behind him, he knew them without turning. "You're supposed to be at the celebration," Jinnah said, settling down beside him. "I needed some quiet." He smiled at her. "Too many people, too much noise. You've earned the noise. You've earned all of it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. "What happens now?" Jinnah asked eventually. "For you, I mean, the hero of the awakening, the face of the new system." Min-Seo thought about it, about the 5,000 skills in his library, about the tens of thousands of hunters who now looked to him for guidance, about the sealed ones, still dreaming beneath the earth, slowly learning to dream different dreams. "I keep going," he said. "I keep teaching, keep connecting, keep helping people understand what they can become." He paused. "And when the next threat comes, whatever it is, whenever it arrives, I'll be there, with everyone else, holding on." Jinnah nodded slowly. "That's enough, that's more than enough." Below them, the city hummed with life. Lights flickered in windows. People went about their evenings, unaware of the ancient things sleeping beneath their feet, unaware of the hunters who stood ready to protect them. Normal life, continuing despite everything. Min-Seo thought about the boy, about the moment of connection in the final battle, about the possibility that even ancient horrors could change, could grow, could become something other than what they'd been. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not that power mattered or rank or skill, but that change was always possible, that no one was beyond redemption, that even the darkest heart could learn to be in rhythm with others. He smiled at the stars. "Let's go home," he said. And together, They descended into the light. 5 years later, the child appeared at the facility's entrance on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was young, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair plastered to her face and eyes that held something ancient behind their innocence. The guards at the gate should have turned her away, should have called social services, or the police, or any of the normal channels for lost children. But something about her made them pause. Something in the way she stood, patient and knowing, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. They called Min-Seo. He came to the gate alone, umbrella in hand, his persistent heart beating its steady rhythm. When he saw her, he stopped, his breath caught. The eyes, he knew those eyes. "Hello, Copycat," the child said, her voice layered with something ancient and familiar. "It's been a while." Min-Seo should have been afraid, should have raised an alarm, called for backup, prepared for battle. But as he looked at her, at the child who wore the remnants of the boy's consciousness like a borrowed coat, he felt only curiosity, and something that might have been hope. "You changed," he said. "I'm learning to." She tilted her head, studying him with those ancient eyes. "It's hard, being something other than what you've always been, but you showed me it was possible. You and your hearts that won't stop beating." She stepped forward, into the shelter of his umbrella. "I want to learn more," she said. "I want to understand what you are, what we could become together." Min-Seo looked at her for a long moment, at the ancient consciousness learning to be a child, at the nightmare dreaming of becoming something more. Then he smiled. "Come on in," he said. "We have a lot to teach you." And together, they walked into the light. Lee Min-Seo's legacy lived on long after he was gone. The copycat who refused to die became a legend, a symbol, a heartbeat that continued to pulse through the hunter community for generations. His methods were studied, his techniques copied, his philosophy embraced. The forgotten were forgotten no more. And deep beneath the earth, in the darkness where ancient things still dreamed, a child with ancient eyes walked among the sleeper, whispering of change, of connection, of hearts that could learn to beat together. The dream wasn't over. It was just beginning to dream differently.